Well, listen, Luca, thanks for this opportunity. Great to see you. And I watched your interview of Lance here, 2 sessions. It's really fascinating. You did a great job of keeping him on track. Sometimes he seems to get off track a little bit, but it requires a little bit of reining in from time to time. Since I've known him for over 50 years, watched his career really blossom. Anyway, yeah, career in just to let me talk a little bit about my career in the Navy, and then interject whenever you like, and we can amplify at some point that seems that might be of interest to you to talk more about. So, I had a 37-year career in the United States Navy, starting in 1958, and I retired in 1995. I graduated the U.S. Naval Academy in class of 1962. I played lacrosse at the Naval Academy as my athletic endeavor. It was an first-team All-American our senior year at Navy. Had sort of what you might call an average academic performance at the Naval Academy, but I managed to get through the top third of my class. So I was very happy with that, of course, that result. And I got what I requested in terms of my chosen warfare specialty, and that was to be a pilot, to go to flight training at Pensacola and beyond and become a Navy pilot. That was not my goal initially when I applied to the Naval Academy. I thought I wanted to be a submariner. And when I was at the Naval Academy one summer, I went aboard a U.S. Navy submarine, an old diesel boat, and got down inside the thing. And I said, "This place is really small. A lot of pipes and a lot of diesel fuel smell." And I said, "I don't think I want to do this." So I opted for something else, and that something else, of course, was to be a pilot later on in my time at the Naval Academy. So graduated in 1962, went to flight training in the summer of 1962, and got my wings at Naval Air Station, Kingsville, Texas, in 1963, in October, November 1963. And I thought I'd be bound for the fleet right away, and I was hoping for the West Coast assignment in California, San Diego, namely, more specifically in Naval Air Station Miramar. But the Navy had other plans for me. So I, along with several other of my classmates from the Naval Academy, after we got our wings, were turned around and sent back to the training command as flight instructors. There was a dearth of flight instructors at the time, so they thought they'd take newly winged young pilots and turn them around and send them back to the training command, which is what I did. And in those days, there were several stages of the training pipeline for naval aviators to go to primary training first, fly the T-34C at Naval Air Station Softley Field in Pensacola, and then following that, you could go to either helicopters or to jets. And I went jets, and then my next step was to Naval Air Station Meridian, Mississippi, to fly the T-2 Buckeye. And then from there, that was jet basic training and jet basic training to Texas, where I flew the F-9F, TF-9J, and the AF-9J. And then at the end of my flight training in the training command, before I got my wings, the most wonderful thing happened, and that was that we were assigned to a squadron called VT Training Squadron 23, and they were equipped with the F-11F Tiger jet, single-engine afterburning, cool-looking airplane. The Blue Angels used it in those days for their demonstration platform. So it was really cool to fly that got about 30 hours of flight time in that airplane. Anyway, back to the training command and back to basic props, not the basic jets, but they sent me and some of my classmates back to basic props, and that was in the T-28 Trojan, piston engine, 3-bladed prop, R1820 engine, plenty of horsepower. It's almost equal in performance to our World War II fighters. So it was a real joy to fly. So at Meridian, Mississippi, there in December of 1963 until December of the following year, I flew T-28s, and I flew a lot. I was really eager to build up my flight time. And you could probably say that I really learned how to fly in that instructor period of time, wherein I had to not only look after myself, I had to look after somebody else, and that was namely the student. I had some interesting things happen to me during the course of that period of time. I was flying an airplane and really learned how to stay ahead of things and develop a set of options to make sure that something happened. If things went one way, I was prepared to handle that particular circumstance, and it really was good for me as a young 22-year-old, 23-year-old young Navy pilot, brand new, with about maybe a total of 350 hours is what I had probably, I think, when we started the flight in the training command. Anyway, after my tour as a flight instructor, then I finally got orders to the West Coast and to Naval Air Station Miramar in San Diego, and to my chosen platform, the F-4 Phantom II. I was so happy about that. I couldn't believe that I was going to get my choice was either the F-8U Crusader or the Phantom. So the Phantom was the newest airplane, and that's where I wanted to go. That's what I got. So out to the F-4 training squadron at Naval Air Station Miramar, and my introduction to the Phantom and to supersonic flight, and all the missions that the Phantom was required to do back in those days. It was built initially as a fleet the interceptor to protect the battle group, the fleet, to protect the fleet, to intercept Soviet bombers and any other enemy aircraft. High altitude, high speed intercepts armed with the Sparrow missile and the early versions of the Sidewinder missile. But one of the cool things that we did then was that we had to do during the course of the training program was we need to be experienced in high altitude, very high altitude flight. So one of the flights that we flew in the training squadron was to do a zoom climb to above 65,000 feet. So for that mission, for that flight, we had to get fitted with a pressure suit, just like the astronauts were wearing. And they had to be carted out to the airplane in a truck with air conditioning, plug in a hose in the truck, and keep yourself cool until you got in the airplane, get it started, and then get the internal air conditioning into your suit. So we had the cool helmet and the cool pressure suit, and so off we went on that flight. That was really fun. And the process was to get airborne, get out over the warning area, accelerate to climb speed, which is 400 knots to 0.9 Mach, and then climb at 0.9 Mach to about 35,000 feet, then bunt the airplane over it, zero G it, and accelerate down to about 25,000 feet, accelerate to Mach 1.2 to 1.3, and then pull your nose up and zoom, see how far you could zoom. Usually we got over 65,000 feet on the zoom climb. Being a full afterburner and passing about, let's say 55,000 feet or so, the afterburners will blow out, and then you're kind of unguided rocket at that point. And just don't do anything stupid with the controls. You don't want to depart the airplane. Just kind of ease it over, negative G over the top, back down again, back down to thicker atmosphere. But at that point, of course, and having done all that afterburner work, we're pretty much out of gas, out of fuel. So it's time to turn for home, and went back and landed. Anyway, had that great time in San Diego to learn how to fly the Phantom. I thought I was going to go to a West Coast fighter squadron. Unfortunately, again, the Navy had other plans for me. I carrier qualified, in that squadron on the USS America that was on the East Coast. I made the trip to the East Coast to carrier qual, and I did pretty well in the carrier qual. So there were six of us in my class. And went back after the carrier quals. Went back to Miramar and walked into the skipper's office, the CO, the commanding officer of the squadron, and he said, "Hey, Fred, I got some news for you." And I said, "Oh, what's that?" And I thought he was going to pat me on the back and say, "Well done at the CQ period, and you're on your way to a fleet squadron here at Miramar." That's not what he said. He said, "Listen, you're going to have to go to a squadron that's already deployed to the Mediterranean Sea, the USS Forrestal." The squadron was Fighter Squadron 74. That was the only F-4 squadron on the Forestall at that time. So I said, crying in my beer, I guess, because I was really having a wonderful time in San Diego and loved the weather out there and loved the flying there. So I jumped in my car. I drove all the way across the United States to Norfolk, Virginia, got a flight from Norfolk, Virginia to the Mediterranean, the military flight, and then to Italy. And then from Naples, Italy, flew out to the USS Forrestal and joined my squadron in the Mediterranean, flying the F-4 Phantom. So that's how my life in the fleet began, and And some interesting things happened during the course of that tour of duty. So that was in 1966 when I joined the squadron, and we had another 4 or 5 months to go in the deployment to the Mediterranean. And when that time was up, we turned and headed for home. We went back to Norfolk, Virginia. The squadron was based out of Naval Air Station Oceana, and we flew there off the beach and prepared for our next deployment. And as things were heating up, that's in 1966, things were really heating up in Vietnam. So we were preparing for a combat deployment aboard the Forrestal. We did all that we could to get ourselves ready. And we had brand new airplanes with some ECM, electronic countermeasures, basic rudimentary, simple-minded electronic countermeasures, because we had gotten the word that the North Vietnamese were using the SA-2 missile to try to shoot our airplanes down, and this helped us a little bit in that environment. So we deployed in April of 1967 from Norfolk, Virginia, went across the Atlantic Ocean, around Cape Good Hope, up through the Indian Ocean, through the Straits of Malacca, thence up to the South China Sea, and then to the Philippines for about 6 days in the Philippines. Did some jungle survival training there at the Philippines, and then we got underway and on up to the Tonkin Gulf, where we started our combat ops. Now, a terrible thing occurred on the 4th day of our deployment there on the USS Forrestal. It happened at 10:50 in the morning on the 29th of July, 1967. And that was we had a terrible fire occur on the flight deck, started by the inadvertent firing of an air-to-ground rocket that went across the flight deck and hit an A-4 airplane on the opposite side loaded with bombs, and started to puncture the fuel tanks, and so jet fuel is now pouring all over the flight deck, and the rocket motor ignited that fuel and started a terrible fire. And we had, unfortunately, been issued some World War II bombs because we were apparently out of the more modern weapons. So the World War II bombs were strapped on a whole bunch of the airplanes, and they were not very stable in terms of their explosive potential. So the fire hit those bombs, and we over a period of a couple of hours, 10 of those bombs detonated and drove great big holes in the flight deck. We lost a number of people during the course of that fire. We had a total of 135 people, young guys, who were killed. In my squadron alone, we lost 45 young men, and our sister squadron lost about the same number. So it took a long time to put the fire out, and we did our very best to fight the fires. None of us were trained very well to fight the fire, unfortunately, but since that fire occurred, the Navy, as a result of the fire, really horsed up their commitment to firefighting training for all hands. Anybody who goes to sea in a Navy ship today receives firefighting training. A number of us didn't have that training, unfortunately, just the way the system worked back in those days. And sadly, we learned a lesson the hard way. That's how things sometimes happen in various operations. And I'm sure you would understand that. So it took a couple of days to finally get the fire out, and we got underway, headed south out of the Tonkin Gulf back to the Philippines. Arrived in port, the Subic Bay. Did the best we could to lick our wounds and clear the flight deck. We had 20 airplanes, I think, totally destroyed, and some of them were just pushed over the side during the course of the fighting the fire. And I think we had about 40 of them were damaged. 40 airplanes were damaged. My squadron, we deployed with 12 airplanes. And when the fire was over, we had, I think it was 2 or 3 that were flyable. So most of our squadron airplanes were destroyed in the fire. Anyway, so a few days in port in the Philippines, and then underway again back around to the Straits of Malacca, Io, around Africa, and on back up to Norfolk, Virginia. And I was really kind of amazed when we arrived back in port in Norfolk, Virginia, to disembark the ship, get down to the pier and look back at the ship. and it was still showed a lot of terrible damage from the fire. We almost lost the ship, to tell you the truth, but because of the efforts of the people fighting the fires, the ship didn't sink. We didn't have any more explosions other than those 10 Mark 82 500-pound bombs that detonated during the course of the fire. So there we were back on the beach at Naval Air Station Oceana in Virginia Beach, Virginia. And as a young, hard-charging young fighter pilot, I wanted to get back to the war. I mean, I didn't get my chance to do anything that I wanted to do as a combat pilot. So I raised my hand along with a few other people. There weren't many of us who volunteered to go back right away, but I was one of those. And so within a month of our arrival back to Oceana, I received a set of orders to the next fleet squadron deploying aboard USS America, and that was Fighter Squadron 33, and my sister squadron was Fighter Squadron 102. So that was in late 1967 that we had returned home, and then I transferred to another squadron. And then in the following spring, when we had done our workups with that squadron, the new squadron, and aboard the USS America, excuse me, we embarked on the USS America and deployed. I deployed again about a year later from the first time on Forestall. Deployed a year after that on America back to South China Sea. So back we went across the Atlantic, around Africa, and so on and so forth, on up to the Tonkin Gulf, and arrived there in about April of 1968. And from that point on, we spent the next 6 months, 4 or 5 months, I think it was, on the line, flying missions over North Vietnam. And then at the conclusion of our deployment, that was I think it was like the 1st of November, we got underway and back to the Philippines and disembarked some air crew and then headed home. But we didn't go back the way we came. We had determined that would be the leadership had determined that would be a good thing for us to complete an around-the-world deployment. So got underway out of the Philippines. We set sail for Australia. We made a port visit to Sydney, Australia, and we were there for 4 days. And it was on the first night there in Australia, I met my wife, who is obviously Lance's mother. So we met, and then later on we were married. But anyway, after that port visit, back to the U.S. and around Cape Horn this time, around South America and up to Rio de Janeiro, and then Rio de Janeiro to Norfolk. And then during the course of that deployment, before we deployed, I had sent in applications to either join the Blue Angels, or that's our flight demonstration team in the U.S. Navy, and also to go to test pilot school. So while we were engaged in combat ops there on America, VF-33, my commanding officer received communication from our Bureau of Naval Personnel that I had been selected for both the Blue Angels and both for test pilot school. So I had a decision to make, and I needed to choose one or the other. And my commanding officer was very influential on the young junior officers, you might imagine. He was a graduate of test pilot school, and he was a classmate of Jim Lovell's from the Apollo 13 fame. So he convinced me that for my career, at any rate, I should go to test pilot school. So that's what I selected, and not the Blue Angels. So when we returned in December on America in December of '67, and December '68, then I received my orders to go to test pilot school. But before I did that, I flew back to Australia after we returned, re-engaged with my wife, and we were married at that time. And I flew back from Australia and then started test pilot school. I was there at class 53 test pilot school, and we flew all manner of different airplanes. And it was really a wonderful experience, because during that era, at any rate, a pilot could fly as many different airplanes as he could get his hands on, and I took full advantage of that, I got to tell you. So I flew lots of different airplanes. I can talk about those later if you want to. But
so you you said you wanted to start off in the submarines, but then you you smelled like the diesel and whatnot, and then you were like, I don't want to do this, and then you wanted to become a pilot. Like, what drew you into aviation?
Just by happenstance, to tell you the truth. I when I was a young boy, my goal in life, what I wanted to do was to be a naval officer and to go to the United States Naval Academy. And that was my only goal. I didn't think anything about what I might do afterwards, about being a pilot. I had no drive to. I just thought that was some sort of elusive sort of career that maybe may not be good enough to do. But the experience, that one experience on that diesel boat submarine, convinced me that I didn't want to go to be a submariner. And then I thought about maybe I'll be a surface warfare officer. And that didn't seem to sit very well with me for very long. And I thought, well, maybe I should be a Marine. But then I thought to myself, the Marines wear these wool uniforms in the summertime. And they're very uncomfortable. So, so I said, I don't think I want to be a Marine. What's left? Well, I guess I'll be a pilot. That's how it happened.
So, what was your first flight like, and what was it in?
My first flight as a student in the training command was in the T-34B Mentor, single engine prop, monoplane, airplane, two-seat, obviously tandem seated. I was in the front seat, and flying an airplane was so foreign to me. I had never thought about it, never read very much about what a pilot did or anything like that. So I had no idea how you steered the airplane on the ground, for example. I thought maybe there was a wheel in there or something, which there isn't, obviously. But so I learned how to taxi the airplane, and that was the thing that we did in my first flight in the T-34. And then up and away in that first flight, and I remember specifically, my instructor was another young. He was a young pilot. He was a lieutenant junior grade, so he was senior to me, but he later became the leader of the Blue Angels, so he's obviously a good pilot. Anyway, up and away, and then the thing that I remember most about that first flight was learning how to trim the airplane. I didn't realize, nobody had told us that you had to trim the control forces out as you accelerate and decelerate, and both in longitudinally and roll wise and pitch wise. So I'm accelerating, of course, and as you accelerate, you have to put forward pressure on the stick to keep yourself level. And the way you do that is you trim it out. Well, I had no idea you did that, so I was just holding it physically. And I said, "This is really hard. I really have to push really hard on the stick to keep the thing level." And the instructor said, "Well, look down to your left, and there's a little thumb wheel. Roll the thumb wheel forward, and that'll engage the trim tab, and the trim tab will ease out those control forces," which I did, of course. Then I realized that that's what you're supposed to do. So that was my first flight.
Yeah, what was that jump between the T-34 and then the T-2, like your first jet-powered like flight? What was that like?
Well, that was great fun. The T-34 was a single engine trainer. I don't know if you've ever seen a picture of it. It
Yeah,
kind of looks like
yeah,
a guppy. It's got a big kind of belly thing, and takes her down to the forward part, the lower part of the fuselage. It had tip tanks on it, straight wing, and so flying the airplane is pretty simple-minded, but it wasn't difficult to fly. Uh, but you needed to learn the idiosyncrasies of the airplane itself. For example, you had to run the power up to, when you get ready to take off, you held the brakes and you ran the power up to all the way forward, it's throttle all the way forward, holding the brakes. And then when you started when you started moving the throttle, you punched the clock, and you had to accelerate to full power within 11 seconds. That's a long time. 11 seconds is a long time. But that's what the requirement of that particular engine. I forget what the J34, I think, was what the engine was. Anyway, it took a long time to spool it up. But that's what the way they were built back in those days. So once it spun up to 100 after 11 seconds, and then you got to no power in 11 seconds, and you release the brakes and you start to roll. Of course, it took a little longer in the summertime when it's hot and humid. Of course, the engine doesn't like to fly very well, work well in those kind of conditions. Anyway, but the thing I remember most about my first flight was, number one, I had a great instructor. I was so impressed with him, and I kept in touch with him my whole career. He always wanted to know how I was doing and where I was headed and so forth. He kept in touch. But so we got airborne, flew the mission, and you had to wear an oxygen mask. And no one told me that you really needed to adjust the mask to fit your face. So for some reason, I had my mask, and it was on very, very tight, very tight. I realized, and I when I came back and landed, my face was all indented with the marks for the oxygen mask, and my nose hurt like heck. And he said, "Well, you can adjust it. You can just so." The silly things like that happen, to you if people don't tell you what to expect. So I fixed that, and then he went on, and then I went on from basic jet to advanced jet training in Texas.
With the AF9, are you still is that still part of the training pipeline? Right. So the AF9 and the F11 are still in the training.
No, they're not anymore. They use the T-45.
Oh yeah.
T-45 now exclusively.
Oh no, but I meant they're still part of your training before you get to a frontline squadron.
Yes, before I got to
Yeah.
back then.
Okay.
And the Cougar was a derivative of the Panther, Grumman airplanes, centrifugal flow engine, not a turbojet, but a centrifugal flow jet. And they had their own idiosyncrasies. But the thing that was really cool about flying those airplanes, the TF9J was a two-seater, front and back, same engine, basically same wing and so forth. And that's what you use for your transition training and a lot of the flights during, of course, the syllabus. But the AF9J was a single seat. So that was so cool to fly a single seat airplane. You thought you were really somebody. And I was lucky enough, we had to carrier qualify in that airplane. And you could either carrier qualify in the two-seater or the one-seater. But I was lucky enough to be assigned to the single seat, so I got to take to the single seat jet to the carrier for carrier qualification. That was so cool too. I felt really good about that. Anyway.
Yeah. So what was that like? The carrier quals on the AF9?
It was we did a lot of training back on land, of course. The simulated carrier pattern and simulated carrier landings. We did that a lot to get us prepared to go to the ship and to learn how to fly what's called the meatball. You may have heard about that. The mirror landing system that was in use at the time. And learn how to fly the pass and fly the pattern and fly the pass. And very very carefully by the landing signal officers who took you to the ship. So, but they got you ready to go. So getting out to the ship was, other than the fact you fly over the ship for the very first time, and when you look down at the ship, no matter which ship it is, even today, you fly over the top of the ship and you look down at this ship at sea, and when you're aboard it, of course, it's a monstrosity. It's a huge piece of metal floating around in the ocean. But when you look down at it from altitude, it's a tiny, tiny little postage stamp. And you say to yourself, my God, I have to land on that. And but you certainly overcome that as you follow your procedures, your checklist, your procedures, and you just do what you've been taught to do back at the field. You just translate that forward to the ship itself. And it all works out.
So what was the evolution of carrier aviation? Was everything all mostly figured out? Flying the pattern is the same with when you were with the F9 as when you were with the F4 or F-14, or how did it evolve throughout, or did they have it mostly figured out?
Well, we had basically the same process, the same pattern, the same checkpoints, different airplanes, obviously, different characteristics of the airplane. But what they trained you to was how to fly the pattern, because the pattern there at the training carrier was the same as a fleet carrier. It's exactly the same pattern for day operations. We didn't do any night operations in the training carrier. It was all day operations. You didn't get to fly off the carrier at night until you got to the fleet, and flying at night off the ship is a different kettle of fish entirely from flying during the daytime.
Do you have any stories from the T-28?
From the T-28?
Yeah.
Oh, hundreds of stories about the T-28 and how I learned how to fly and how some of the stupid things that occur. A young pilot who thinks he can conquer the world, you do some silly things that you're lucky to have survived. But one that comes to mind for me was that we on the weekends, to get more flight time, we would take cross countries in the T-28, and we would take it from when we'd fly to different airports around the country, and even to the extent that we would very occasionally fly from Pensacola to California, and in the T-28 that took a long time because you're going only about 170 knots at altitude, and have to make two or three stops for fuel all the way out there. So you get out there all the way to the West Coast, and you probably have one night there, and you have to turn around and come back. But at one point, we were flying to the West Coast, and we weren't supposed to fly formation as young instructors. We weren't cleared to do that. But what we would do is we'd launch a bunch of guys who go to the first stop, and then we all get together to fly formation on the next leg. That's what we did. One particular instance over Arizona, we were headed to the West Coast, and we were at altitude and looked up and flying in a westerly direction, and looked and saw what looked like a weather front that we were heading towards. And I was not the leader of the formation at the time. I was flying number 2 in the flight of 4 T-28s. And the other pilot in the airplane with me said, "Well, we're getting close to that weather. Maybe we hope the guy who's leading us here knows what he's doing, because we got to get through that or over it." So we kept motoring towards it, and finally, the pilot who was in flying number 1 looked down at me and then passed me the lead. He made me the lead formation leader. That was his solution on what to do. Let somebody else make the decision, and that was to be. So, the signal to pass the lead is this: you tap your head, and then you point down to the next guy. So that's what he did. He tapped his head, pointed to me, and said, "I'm gonna now have the lead." I said, "Oh my goodness! Well, we'll take care of this." So we kept headed west early. So I started to climb, and we were on oxygen above 10,000 feet. We had oxygen in the T-28. Over 10,000 feet, we put the oxygen masks on, continued to climb, and then going through 13,000 feet, you have to engage the supercharger because the air is real thin. So we had to go. We call it high and low blower. So we had to select high blower, and continued to climb, and still heading towards the frontal system. And then we topped out at 22,000 feet in a T-28. Now that's pretty high for the reciprocating prop airplanes. So all 4 of us were up there, and started to get dark, and we crested the top of the weather system and got to the other side, fortunately. And now it's full night. The sun had set, and we're flying night formation, which we were never supposed to do, and took it down on the other side of the front. And I saw on the horizon ahead of me the glow of a city. And I looked at our charts, and I said, that's Las Vegas. Nellis Air Force Base is there. So I changed flight plans. We headed towards Nellis Air Force Base and landed there. But that's an experience that a young junior officer was lucky enough to survive and come back home and talk about it.
Did everyone do such thorough flight training before they got to a frontline squadron?
Yes, the same syllabus. Different tracks, though. I mean, there's a jet pipeline, there's a helicopter pipeline, and then there's a multi-engine pipeline. And fortunately, it was kind of a chancy thing when you finished basic flight jet training and you went to Texas to do your advanced jet training. You thought you could be easily diverted to go to one of these other pipelines. So whenever we went down when we finished our basic jet at Meridian, Mississippi, went to Texas, we all had our fingers crossed. The guys who wanted to go jets, which we all did, you kept your fingers crossed that you wouldn't be chosen to be one of the select few to go to these other pipelines. So I was lucky enough to remain in the jet pipeline.
So do you have any advice for people going through flight school or wanting to go through flight school, and how they deal with that, like high kind of high pressure environment where they have to perform, and it's quite easily like you might be just cut and sent somewhere else?
The best advice I think I can give any aspiring young aviator, naval aviator, Air Force pilot, or whomever is to know your procedures, know the procedures, know the systems in the airplane, know the procedures, and continually review those items. You know, day after day, hour after hour. Just steep yourself, immerse yourself in the procedures for that particular airplane. Its handling characteristics, spin recovery procedures, everything that they want you to know cold. You just make sure you have to know that stuff, and you have to be able to fall back. If something happens, you need to fall back on emergency procedures, and you need to know those emergency procedures cold also, and to be prepared, be ready to be ready for the mission. You have a flight coming up. You know what the flight's all about. You know it's an instrument training flight or tactical flight of some sort, a formation training flight or whatever. Be prepared. Study the books, the manuals, and be ready for it. And be ready to answer the questions when the instructor when you go to the briefing. Be ready for that. Be ready for the whole event.
Yeah.
You're there, and you're in the training command to learn to fly and be a military pilot, and you need to be disciplined about the learning process.
Yeah. So, what was your first flight in the F-4? Like, what was it like walking up to the jet, the new F-4?
It was awesome. It was awesome. That was just the way the F-4 sat on the flight line. As you you go to maintenance control, you sign out the jet, you're with the instructor. You have a pilot in your back seat for your first flight. That's the instructor pilot. In Navy airplanes, there weren't any controls in the back seat, except for we did have a couple of airplanes in that training squadron I went to for the F-4. They were F-4As. And the A model was the early model of the F-4, and it had controls in the back, flight controls in the back. It didn't have very many of those, however. So most of them were F-4Bs, and the F-4B was powered by a J79-8 engine, two of those. But start to walk out to the flight line for your first flight, and you look at all these beautiful looking airplanes sitting, really cool, mean looking things sitting on the flight line. The F-4 Phantom was a cool looking machine. Walk out there. You hope that you don't hope that you're not overwhelmed by the impression that you have, because number one, you won't be if you're ready and you're ready to fly the mission. But manning up, strapping up, you strap it on. I mean, it was a sturdy beast. And the one thing that was of interest to me was to be able if I was going to be able to react quickly enough to make the takeoff. So you want to start the takeoff roll, go into afterburner, and you accelerate very quickly to those two J79s powering you, and you get airborne very quickly. Accelerate to 400 knots. It was a lot different then than it is now. But you go to 400 knots for your departure procedure. And you turn out to the sea at 500 feet over the San Diego city, not the city itself, but the surrounding area. Accelerate out over the water, then climb. Climbing at 400 knots. That was the climb speed. That's fast. You maintain 400 knots until you reach 0.9 Mach, and then continue 0.9 Mach all the way to whatever altitude you're going to get to. That was so cool. I mean, the pure acceleration and those burners kick in, and you have no how quickly you get to 200, 250 knots. You got to get the gear and the flaps up before you overspeed them. I mean, it was amazing. You're just kind of hanging on for the ride.
Yeah. Did you ever fly the British Phantoms with I think they had like a slower like throttle response compared to the J7?
Yeah, the F4K and the F4M, I think. One was an RAF variant, and the other was a Royal Navy variant. And I never flew one of those with the SPAY engine. Those were turbofan engines built by Rolls-Royce, and they had some engine acceleration challenges of their own with those airplanes, especially the Royal Navy variant. We flew off the Ark Royal, and how they flew the Phantom off the Ark Royal, which is a tiny ship in comparison to the U.S. Carriers. Even the Forrestal class is much smaller than the later the nuclear powered Nimitz class ships that we have in the Navy now. But yeah, so let's see, where was I? I forgot where I was in that discussion. Oh, the spay engines. I'm sorry. And the other things that they had to contend with on Ark Royal was that the catapult run out, the catapult shot wasn't as long as the ones on the U.S. carrier, and of course the run out of on the arresting gear was decidedly different because the landing area is a lot shorter. So the landing on Ark Royal was apparently really a dramatic, violent kind of a thing to happen because you're landing very short speed area, and the catapult shots were interesting because in the U.S. Navy F-4 fans, when you get up to the catapult, then you had to extend the nose gear to get the wing at the appropriate angle of attack for takeoff. That's how that was done. So you get to the catapult, you extended the nose strut. It came up, popped up maybe 3 to 4 or 5 degrees, and that's how you took the cat shot. Well, on the Ark Royal, they had a extension to that extension to get them at the proper angle of attack to launch off Ark Royal, because the catapult shot was a lot shorter and more violent than the U.S. carriers.
Yeah. What was your best flight in the F-4 before the first deployment that you went on when you joined halfway through?
Oh, that's a hard one to answer. I mean, they were. I love flying air-to-air missions in the Phantom. Doing air-to-air against a simulated adversary, simulated Russian or North Vietnamese airplane, simulated, and doing dogfighting training. I love to do the dogfighting. The F-4 Phantom didn't have great turning characteristics in a horizontal turn. The Russian airplanes, fighters, and North Vietnamese fighters, they were using North Vietnamese were using Russian equipment, and the MiG-17 and MiG-21s, they had better turning characteristics than we did in the F-4 Phantom. So we had to train to a different way to fight. So then the F-4, because of its thrust to weight ratio, we could fight well in the vertical. So instead of a horizontal fight in the F-4, we had to work the vertical. So that's how that was our main tactic.
Yeah.
But flying in those kinds of missions is just really, it's a lot of fun. That's what fighter pilots train to do and love to do.
Yeah. So what was the air-to-air like? So it's like before Top Gun. So were there any like specific aggressor squadrons to? Yeah.
In that era, no, there were not. We didn't. This is before Top Gun was commissioned. Before Top Gun came on the scene. Top Gun didn't come out on the scene until about 1972, and this is well before that. So we would do similar ACM, or we might contact another squadron on the base that flew a different type of aircraft, because you'd like to fly dissimilar ACM. Flying 1v1 against another F-4 was not really productive. You needed to go against another adversary. We suddenly started to realize that as time went on in the F-4 community, the fighter community in the Navy, that we needed this dissimilar adversary kind of training. And so the evolution of those kinds of squadrons took a long time to happen to get the right assets in place, but now they're there, fully operational, as you know, probably know, and doing the work that they do as adversaries, flying the F-5, the F-16, they did that for years, and a couple of other platforms, the A-4, for example. But flying those missions was really, really fun.
Yeah. So what was tanking over the pond like, getting to the Mediterranean?
I'm sorry, what was the question, Luca?
What was tanking, like aerial refueling over the pond, getting to the Mediterranean? What was that like? with the
And
F-4?
the Phantom, it was pretty easy. I always thought I find it was really cool to rendezvous on a tanker and the F-4 Phantom, come on the inside of the circle to join up on the tanker, and it might be like an A6 tanker, or we occasionally use the KC-135s, but most often we were using the A3. But in those days, an A3 tanker or an A6 tanker. And it was so fun, so cool to rendezvous on the inside of that tank, join up on him, and as you're getting closer to him, you time it to hit the switch, extend the in-flight refueling probe. It would come out, and you're still getting closer to him. But to have the in-flight refueling probe come out just exactly as you were starting to plug him, and you stop your closure rate at that point. That was the slick way to do it, and we did it a lot, so you got really good at it, and that was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Did you do any dissimilar with the other nations that you like passed through on the way to the Med?
Well, we did in a couple of times with the trips across the Atlantic to head to Vietnam, to the South China Sea. We fought the Brazilian Air Force had F-5s, and so we had a couple of times we would brief with those guys and fight them out just off the coast of South America on our way over to Vietnam. Did a little bit of that on some of the big exercises in the Mediterranean and deployments to the Mediterranean, where we would fight the French. A couple of times we set things up where we engaged with the Spanish Navy. At that time they had Harriers flying out of Rota, Spain, and we did some flying against them. And then also against the French out of south of France. They were based at Hyères down in the southern part of France. We set up some operations to train against them as well. So the opportunities to do that, the similar ACM against some of the foreign countries, they're few and far between, but we did do it occasionally.
Yeah. So how did you prepare for the SA-2 threat with, like, it's like a new platform that you're going up against? How did you develop ways to fight against this new threat?
I'm sorry, which threat?
The SA-2.
Oh, the SA-2. I'm sorry. Yeah, SA-2. Well, by trial and error, really. We had some experimental squadrons, VX-4 and VX-5, who developed counter SAM tactics for us. The big thing about the SA-2 was that if you could see it, you could defeat it. In other words, if you saw the thing being fired, and as it started to track in your ECM gear, your electronic countermeasures gear, and your warning systems were going off in your headset, that clouded the issue a lot, because there's a lot of other chatter coming over your headset too, on strike frequency and so forth, and then all the warning sounds that are coming in because you're being shot at by a SAM. But if you see the SAM, you could turn into it. If he's tracking you, you could pretty much tell. It was like a big telephone pole flying up at you, and if you turn hard into it and then reverse your turn, you could cause the thing to overshoot, and it would detonate usually over your shoulder. So the guys who sadly were hit by SAMs, either they're in an area where there are just multiple SAMs being fired at them, so they didn't have a lot of choices into which way to go. So of course, that was just really a problem of numbers of SAMs that were being fired.
So in those 4 days before the fire on the Forrestal, what missions were you flying, if any?
Well, as I mentioned, we were only on the line for 4 days. I had flown the first day we were there, and flew a flight that was supposed to go over the beach and do a road recce down in the southern part of North Vietnam. But the weather was lousy, so we didn't go over the beach. We had to cancel because of weather options, so we had to get rid of our ordnance and then go back to ship and land and hope for better things the next day. I flew the second day barrier cap mission that was up to the northern part of the Tonkin Gulf. That was all over water. Still terrible weather over the beach. And then I don't think I flew the third day. And then the fourth day, I had something called the Alert 5. We maintained a 5-minute alert status the whole time we were in the Gulf of Tonkin. We had airplanes manned, fighters manned and ready on the flight deck in case there was some attempt by the North Vietnamese to come out and to do something to us at sea. And I'd had the early morning alert 5 duty. I finished at about 5 o'clock in the morning and went back to my stateroom and laid down to rest for a little bit because I had to have a briefing at 11 o'clock that morning for my first major alpha strike. So the first flight of the day was an alpha strike, and I was going to go on the second big alpha strike that day up into the Hanoi area. It was a big deal for all of us, of course. First, and the weather was supposed to be was good that day, so we would have gone over the beach for sure. And after I had my alert, I went back to my stateroom, as I said, and laid down to rest and get ready for the mission for me. And it was at 10:50. I was still just getting out of my bunk when the first bomb went off as a result of the fire, and then all hell broke loose after that.
So you then went to VF-33. So yeah, what were the types of missions you flew with them in Vietnam? And were you still on the F-4B, or was it F-4Js? Or
well, we had changed. That squadron was equipped with the F-4J with the -10 J79. The -8 in the F-4B was a good, reliable engine, but it smoked. And there's a lot of smoke. This big smoke. It always left a big smoke trail, so you could see them coming from a long distance off. The -10 engine did not. It was smokeless. But so flying the -10 was a lot, obviously from a stealth perspective, it was a heck of a lot better. So so I flew the J's there in VF-33 and had a different radar in it, the AUG-10 radar. We had the AUG-9 radar in the F-4B, which is pulse only, and then pulse. That's a system. That's a radar capability. And we had a different radar in the F-4J. Sadly, our success with the radars was not all that great. They were not very reliable, unfortunately. We had on that deployment we had several MiG encounters as well. Unfortunately, I was never involved in one, but we had a couple of encounters wherein our fighters were engaged by MiG-17s and MiG-21s, and they tried to fire Sparrow radar-guided missiles. They were never in any position to fire a Sidewinder, but they fired the Sparrow, and the missiles just did not work, unfortunately. And this happened several times, so there was great concern about that, obviously. The Air Force was flying the F-4 at the same time as having the same experience with the failures of the Sparrow missile to operate properly. So to get to the bottom of it and to find out why we were not doing well in the air-to-air encounters with the F-4 Phantom, there was something that the U.S. Navy stood up, that resulted in something called the ALT report. Captain John Alt headed a team of guys who came out to the fleet there in the Tonkin Gulf to take a look at our procedures and how we were firing the weapons and so forth, and why we were having these failures. So they did up their report, and one of the recommendations was for us and my air wing and ship the next time we were in port to QB Point in the Philippines, was to go to send some airplanes ashore first, and then fly some missions over the Gulf and fire a whole bunch of Sparrow missiles, 30 Sparrow missiles, to identify the weaknesses in the system. Well, we did that, and they made some changes to the Sparrow missile, and later on, for other deployments, it didn't help us. They couldn't get anything changed and ready for us to use. With later deployments, the Sparrow improved its reliability. So anyway, we had one MiG encounter. No, it's correction. We had two MiG encounters that were notable our first deployment, our sister squadron was engaged by MiG 21s and MiG 17s, and they fired a couple of sidewinders at them, none of them guided. And one of the airplanes, one of our F-4 fans, was shot down by a MiG-21 that was launched. Their heat-seeking missile was called the ATOL, fired an ATOL at that F-4 fan and shot him down. The commanding officer of the squadron was in that airplane. He ejected into he and his backseater were POWs for a long time.
What was the second MiG engagement, like notable one that you had?
Sorry?
What was the second MiG?
Next MiG encounter was a positive one for us. One of the pilots, air crew in my squadron, engaged the MiG-21, shot a MiG-21 down with an ATOL missile. So that was a positive for us. It's not a sidewinder missile.
Yeah. What was that engagement like? Like, how did it?
As I recall, the reconstruct on it was they engaged them, made one turn, and the MiGs, a section of MiGs, that's two airplanes. They turned north, headed back towards base, and our guys just kind of did a high side wing over and dropped in behind them and fired the missile. There wasn't much turning. There was not a big turning engagement that could have happened. It was just they got behind him, fired the sidewinder, and shot down the 21.
Yeah. So did you ever like personally see like a MiG like up close, or did you ever like encounter them, even see it like on your radar or like have them nearby?
Well, we got a couple of calls on the radio that there were MiGs airborne and a couple of our strikes and so forth, but I never came in vision. Sadly, I never came close to seeing one. Although I did my very best to tease them, to try to get them up in the air, but never had the chance, unfortunately.
Yeah. How did you like tease them out? Because they don't. I think they like try and tease you in and try and like make you lose the advantages that the F4 has, so that they can get you easier. Like how. Like what did you try to get them to come out?
Oh well, we would fly over the beach. My great friend, squadron mate, and I would get ourselves set up to fly together as a section, and we'd lay on the mission ourselves as a MiG cap. So we'd fly over the beach at about 350 knots or so, at about 15,000 feet, 10 to 15,000 feet, and we were hoping that the North Vietnamese would think, okay, here comes a couple of losers, let's send the MiGs up. So that was kind of our hope, but it never happened. We were just we were just basically hanging it all out there to see if we could get somebody to come up, get airborne, and challenge us. That never occurred, however.
Yeah. Did the Navy ever do something similar to Operation Bolo? Like,
no, we never did, and that's there. Robin Olds was the champion of that one, of course, and he's the one that set that all up, and with great success. And because I think they got several MiGs, he got two, I believe, as I recall. So no, we never did mount that kind of a operation.
yeah,
Basically, the strikes over the beach were mixed bag, either section road reconnaissance in a route package, trying to interdict along highway route number one, and or larger scale strikes with a mixed bag of different kinds of airplanes, with the F4 Phantoms providing cover, flying tar cap or mid cap to protect the strike group. Or in some cases, the Phantoms were used as flak suppressors to roll in on the target, to suppress the flak, for the attack aircraft to roll in on the target, and they improve their chances of getting a good hit.
yeah. Did you ever do the flak suppression mission?
Oh yeah, oh yes. You could see the flak. See, they had different size at 23 millimeter and 37 millimeter cannon and up. And you can see the detonations of the flak. You can see that for sure, and you can see the tracers. One particular mission that I was on. We were escorting a strike group, and the weather was bad at the target, so we all had to go to the principal target. So we had to go to alternate targets, and our alternate target was a bridge over a river along a highway. And just the two of us, my leader and me, I was flying his wing, and he rolled in on the target, and I rolled in a few seconds after him, and to release my bombs. And there were tracers coming over the top of the canopy. So I was very, very much aware of the fact that they were shooting at me personally. It became a very personal thing at the time. So anyway, fortunately they didn't hit me. But as I pulled off the target, I looked up and I saw my leader. As I pulled the nose up and started to climb out of there, and I looked up and saw my leader turning towards the east to fly out over the water. And I noticed a stream of what looked like smoke coming out of his airplane. And I thought, well, maybe it's just a contrail. So I accelerated, joined up on him, and he was on fire. So I said, "Hey, you're on fire. You know, you're going to get out of the airplane." And but we were still feet dry. Feet dry means over the land. We didn't want to. They didn't want to eject over land because you become a POW. You don't want that to happen, obviously. So they waited until they got over right at the beach line, and initiated the ejection sequence. And I was on their wing when the back seat fired. So the back seat fired, he ejected. The front seat, which should have followed 3/4 of a second after the back seat went out. He didn't go. It didn't eject. The canopy was stuck. So in the F-4 Phantom, you could not eject through the canopy. The glass was too thick. So you had to get rid of the canopy. So the canopy didn't leave, and there's an interrupter block in the ejection system that prevented the seat from firing. So the pilot, I could see him in the inside of the airplane with his K-bar knife banging on the inside of the canopy to try to get it off, to pop it a little bit so the airstream would carry it away, because we were going pretty fast. We were over 400 knots at that point. And so all of a sudden, boom, the canopy went, and then his seat fired, and out he went. So both two good ejections, two good parachutes. We didn't have a gun in the Phantom, which is one of the major detractors of that airplane overall for years. And the Air Force finally had a gun installed in the F-4E. But anyway, so we didn't have a 20 millimeter cannon to provide some suppressive fire as the guys when they hit the water. They're pretty close to the beach, and I could see some fishing boats on the beach, are starting to get underway to go out to pick them up. So fortunately, a couple of A-7 aircraft, attack aircraft with a gun, got in there and started making some runs up and down the beach and shooting at the fishing boats to keep them away from our guys, until a helicopter came in and picked them up, pulled them out of the water, and brought them back to the ship. And they're wet, but otherwise uninjured. So that's the day when we saw flak.
Wow. Yeah, what were the typical missions that you would have flown, or what did the average day on that deployment look like?
Day and night, we were flying road reconnaissance missions up and down Route Pac 1 and trying to interdict supply routes down from North Vietnam down to South Vietnam. Another mission was to fly the barrier cap, which was up in the northern part of the Gulf, just back and forth in case the MiGs came up. And we did that constantly. That cap station was manned, I think, 24 hours a day, and we swap off with the other carriers that were in the Tonkin Gulf to provide the support for that mission. And then another mission, which was kind of fun actually, was to escort the RA-5C Vigilante. It was a photo reconnaissance aircraft, and the Vigilante couldn't do very much, but it could go really fast, at low altitude, like well over 500 to 600 knots at that altitude. So the mission for us as a fighter was to provide escort for them. So to stay up with the Vigilante, you had to be, of course, be flying very, very fast and at low altitude, and you had to plan your turn to stay with him, just to stay with him, because once he made a turn, you could get back behind him too far to provide any kind of useful support for him. So that was kind of fun to be down at low altitude, just going like hell. chasing the vigilante and trying to protect him, tell him if you see any missiles or any AAA, give him a heads up, and also to protect him against any interdiction by North Vietnamese fighters.
Yeah. And was the recce's just by the F-4? How did you do those? Because you don't have like a targeting board. You don't have like cameras like on an RF-4. So how did you do those recce's? Is it just with your eyes?
Eyeball. It's just with your eyes. Yeah, you try to find trucks that were moving up and down. Of course, they didn't move very much in the daytime. They knew what we were trying to do and trying to slow down the flow of supply down to the south. But we also flew them at night. But we flew at night under flare light. The flares would give us the ability to see things moving on the highway, over bridges or over rivers.
Do you have any like memories of doing that sort of mission at night?
Do I have do I recall? Yeah, absolutely. We were again with my friend I mentioned earlier. He and I would fly those kinds of missions under flares, and we one mission in particular was kind of interesting in that we saw he dropped the flares. I rolled in on what we saw was a pontoon bridge over a river underneath the starlight. So you only have 180 seconds of light before the flare goes out. So you have to do things in a hurry. Once you see a target, you better get on it right away because the flare, you're going to lose it once the flare extinguishes. So anyway, rolled in, got my bombs. Then the flares went out. So I got my bombs off. I didn't see any secondary explosions, so I don't know if I got hit or not. But dropped another flare, and I didn't see the pontoons anymore. I'm not sure what happened to them, but I don't know if I hit them or whether they moved them ashore. But I did see at the same time, I did see a vehicle that was running down one of the roads. It looked like a staff car to me from the altitude I was at. Actually, I was pretty low at the time, but anyway, it looked like a staff car running down the road, and so I rolled in on that, and dropped some bombs on the staff car. I don't know if I hit it or not. I think I came close. Those are the kinds of missions that we flew at night.
Yeah. Do you have any non-conventional mission types that you did that you did once or twice?
The ordinary, I'm not sure what you mean by a special mission.
Yeah, just like outside of the ordinary.
No, they're really, those are the typical missions I described are the ones that we flew all the time for the fan. Now the A6s and the other strike aircraft were doing a little bit different thing. They were doing things different than what we were doing.
So did you work much with the land-based Air Force or Marines, or was it like quite separate with what you guys were doing?
Yes, it was. No, we never did. We never did work in concert with them for kind of sort of a joint strike of any sort. Excuse me. And North Vietnam was divided up into we call them route packages. Route Pack 1 was right there from the DMZ up north, and then they went up to Route Pack 5 and 6. Route Pack 5 and 6 were up in the northern part of North Vietnam, and they contained the lucrative targets like Hanoi and Haiphong. So the Air Force had those route packages up north. We shared one of them with them, and then we operated further south, mostly the Route Pack 4, 3, and 2. Route Pack 1 was close to the DMZ, and that's where pretty much the Air Force operated down there, and as well as the Marine Corps, flying out of the Da Nang and a couple of the other bases down there in the northern part of South Vietnam.
Yeah. So you mentioned like the very close, like the AAA coming up over you. Do you have any other like really close, like yeah, like do you have any really close like moments?
That was close enough. I didn't want to see that again.
Yeah. So from
the interesting thing as I thought about it later on, was those tracer rounds was going over the canopy. So and I was in a 45-degree dive, and they're going over the canopy. And so, but the rounds are going behind me. So the gunners were not pulling enough lead on me. So they're shooting over my head, basically. It was close enough for me to I didn't hear them, but I could sure see them.
Yeah. Did you see anyone like improve and like pull their lead whilst you were doing that attack?
Fortunately, that out for me.
Yeah.
So I'm sure they must have for others. A lot of guys got shot down by AAA, unfortunately.
Yeah.
One of we had some basic rules of engagement that we adhered to. Some people violated the rules, and they paid for it. The first rule was that you had a hard deck of 3,000 feet. You didn't want to fly below 3,000 feet if you could help it, because that'll put you down in the small arms environment. So a lot of people were shot down by small arms. And then you didn't want to make multiple runs at a single target. A lot of people made multiple runs. They did multiple runs down in South Vietnam, and the close air support supported the ground or infantry on the ground. But and that was necessary, and they had to do that. But up in the north, you didn't want to. You just could not make multiple runs, because once you make the run, then they know you're there, and they know where you're coming from, and so everything's shooting in that direction. Your chances of survival are minimal.
Yeah.
So rigidly adhere to. If you adhere to that, you can do the mission, accomplish the mission to get it done, and give yourselves a margin of safety in that high risk environment.
Yeah. Did you always stick by that, or did you ever like do a second pass because you like really like someone was like you needed to support someone, so you had to break that, or did you always just stick by?
Oh, that never occurred. Never occurred. No, didn't happen, and that nor would I have considered it to making a multiple run up north.
Yeah. So from there, you became a test pilot. So yeah, after Vietnam. So yeah, what were like the experiences that you had? What was your favorite aircraft to fly? Did any of the ones that you tested there top what you had previously flown before becoming a test pilot?
In at test pilot school, as I mentioned earlier, we had an opportunity to fly a lot of different airplanes, and things are a little bit looser than they are now, and rightfully so, I think, because things are a lot safer now. But in those days, we could, if we saw an airplane we'd never flown before, we could request find somebody who would check you out in it. You'd read the book, you'd study the book, take a quiz, get a briefing, and then off you'd go. And sometimes it's just a single seat airplane that you'd never flown before, and you'd have somebody chase you in our operating area, and then give you an up check, and then you're free to fly it whenever you want to fly it, whenever you needed to fly it. And the assets were there for purpose, of course, to train the test pilots in the test pilot school, and then later on in the test directorates to fly the test missions. So that's what they're for. But you also had this situation wherein, if you wanted to, you could get some time in some other airplanes without too much trouble. If there's an airplane that interested you, you could do the procedure, study the book, take the test, get a check ride, and you're good to go.
Yeah, what was your favorite type to fly during your time?
Oh, I flew a lot of airplanes. Let's see, things that were new and different for me were I got to fly the F-8 Crusader. Flew the A-4 a lot. I flew the A-6. I flew the test pilot school. We had gliders, and the Schweitzer 232, and they're brand new to our school. So it's just another flying machine that test pilots should become familiar with. So we got checked out in the glider, Schweitzer 232. And then that was during the heyday. I was a test pilot during the heyday of the Vietnam War, of course. And so we were doing some things that we were trying to help the deployed forces. One of the things that we had there was really an oddity. It was a Schweitzer 232 that had an engine behind the cockpit. and it drove a propeller shaft that went over the top of the canopy, and the propeller was mounted on it was leveraged, laid on top of a support structure at the nose of the glider, so you could get the glider airborne. It was designed to be a stealthy recce aircraft over the Route 1, which is in the North and South Vietnam, so that you could fly without the engine on, so the enemy couldn't hear you, and then if you could glide around and try to find these guys that were hiding along the roadside. And then once you get down at lower altitude, you start the engine and you climb back up again. Once you get back down altitude, you turn the engine off and you start gliding again. So that was an oddity, odd looking airplane, but it was a glider, and I got to fly that a couple of times. That was really very interesting.
Yeah. So from there, how does the F-14 story come into this?
The F-14 came along towards the end of my tour as a test pilot at Patuxent River. So we knew it was going to be introduced to the fleet, and in the early 70s. So we thought, okay, the F-14 is going to come along. It's going to give us all things that the F-4 didn't have. For example, a lot more internal fuel, ability to stay airborne a lot longer, better handling qualities around the ship. It'll have a superior weapon system and be able to employ the Phoenix missile long range against targets. So we looked forward to it with great anticipation. My first introduction to the airplane itself, however, was up in Bethpage, New York, when they were building the airplane, putting it together. Was to go up and look at the first F-14 I saw was a wooden one. There was a mock-up of the full-scale mock-up of the airplane. It was just all made out of wood. To look at the cockpit and the cockpit arrangement and so forth, that was interesting. Then the first flight occurred for the Tomcat. I think it was in 1970, I believe. My memory serves me correctly, but that was in an abortive flight with the test pilots flying the airplane out of a place on the northern part of Long Island. And it got airborne okay, and in flight they had a hydraulic failure, and that sadly they tried to bring the airplane back, and it landed at the airfield, but the hydraulics gave out, lost all control of the aircraft, and the crew had to eject. The crew survived, but we lost the airplane, of course. Well, Grumman, who was the manufacturer of the airplane, it took them a week or so to figure out what had happened. They made the fix, and so that it took care of that. So then they started the full scale test program. Interestingly, even if you rewind that a little bit, go back even before the first flight, I attended and this is before the F-14 Grumman was selected to build the F-14. I had participated in a briefing to a bunch of engineers and test pilots about the down select, what the candidates were for the F-14 program itself. And the gentleman who gave the brief was the chief engineer of the Naval Air Systems Command, and gave the briefing about the different candidates, the submissions by industry, what the F-14 was supposed to look like. There, of course, was a Grumman submission, and we know what that looked like. But there's also one from McDonnell Douglas, and another one from Boeing, and so forth. But the McDonnell Douglas submission looked exactly like the F-15 looks, and it was, in fact, the same one. If you look at the F-15, it has an elongated canopy, and it goes pretty far aft. So that would have been the back seat had it been the two-place variant that the Navy wanted for its air fighter. But the team did not select that one, of course. So selected the Grumman plan, and the Navy went forward with that.
Yeah. So did the first, walking up to the F-14, did that top what you felt walking up to the F-4, or was it was it even more exciting, or was it like, oh, the F-4 still?
It was really an exciting event. My first flight in the F-14 was out in Miramar, back at San Diego at the Naval Air Station Miramar, and very excited. We were all very excited about the program. It was about the airplane and the potential that it had for becoming the true air superiority fighter that we all wanted. A better turning airplane, better than F-4. As you recall, I talked about the turning capabilities of the F-4 Phantom not being all that great. But you could work the vertical. The F-14 is an airplane that you could turn. Actually, you had great turning capability in the F-14. But we wanted a lot more internal fuel in the F-14 than we had in the Phantom, because our Vietnam experience was that we had to carry external fuel tanks in the F-4, either centerline tank or two wing tanks, to give us the extra fuel that we needed to really perform the missions that we wanted to fly. So when the F-14 was designed, we wanted to put all that fuel internally. When you do that, of course, the airplane's going to get bigger. So it became a big fighter, a big airplane. That change was acceptable to us because we're all in those days, we were all air-to-air purists. We wanted an air-to-air fighter. We weren't interested in air-to-ground. We didn't want to drop any bombs off the F-14. We wanted a fighter, pure, unadulterated, unencumbered fighter, and that's what the F-14 was in what we thought it would be. So to see it for the first time was really, and to fly it the first time was just awesome. It was very impressive in its performance.
Do you have any stories or memories of the first part of the F-14?
Yes, my first flight in the F-14 Tomcat was with a guy named Burner Burnett, and Burner's to this day a dear friend. But he was in my back seat when I had my first flight in the Tomcat out at Miramar. One of the maneuvers that we did, which we thought was incredible, you'd never even think of trying this, but the F-14, you pull the nose up into the vertical, and you pull the power back to idle, and you go to zero airspeed, and you do kind of a tail slide. And then the nose would drop down, and then you had to be very careful about not putting any control input in it, because if you did, you might spin the airplane. You don't want to do that. So you very carefully hang on to touch the controls, but do the tail slide. The nose flops down, and then away you go. You couldn't even think about doing something like that in the F-4 Phantom, because you're guaranteed you're going to depart the aircraft and you get yourself in a flat spin, and you don't want that to happen. So that was a real thrill to be able to have that kind of capability in the airplane that we never had before in the Phantom.
Yeah. And why did the philosophy between the change from air-to-air purist to now more multi-role capability in the main frontline fighters, why did that come about?
It's something that evolved over time. The Navy, the fighter aviation, knew that we needed to get our F-14 Tomcat into that mission, to give the air wing itself, the carrier air wing embarked on the ship, greater strike capability. And it turned out that finally, at last, after 20 or 25 years of the airplane being in service, we put the Lantern targeting pod on the Tomcat, and it had the ability to carry a lot of ordnance once we figured out how and where to hang it on the airplane. And with the precision guided weapons, we like JDAM and that sort of thing, and laser Mavericks and so forth. We really had a great strike platform. We didn't realize that we really had. So our bias, because of our Vietnam experience, wherein it said we want an air-to-air fighter so we can win against the MiGs, and quite in concert with what was contained in the alt report that I mentioned about the losses that the failures that we experienced in Vietnam. We knew we had an airplane that could really perform air-to-air wise. So we were air-to-air purists, if you will. But then we realized that really realize the full potential of the airplane, we needed to hang some air-to-ground weapons on it, and we did. And it turned out it was really a great platform. Carry a lot, go a long way, and deliver weapons in a very accurate way.
Yeah. What did you find in the F-14 program was like the most interesting to you? Like the most, I don't know how to put it, like, yeah, just the most interesting part that like really drawed, like what you, like drawed your attention towards.
Yeah, sure. The F-14 program itself was supposed to begin with the F-14A, which is equipped with the TF-30 turbofan engine. And then they were supposed to build maybe a couple of dozen of those airplanes with the TF-30 in it, and then we would swap with we field the F-14B, and the F-14B was supposed to be equipped with the 110 GE 110 engine, and so as it turned out, that didn't happen because of money. We kept building F-14s with the TF-30 engine in it, and the TF-30 had some terrible deficiencies. It would compressor stall at high angle of attack, and on top of that, in the early days of the program, we had some compressor blades that were coming apart, and the engine disintegrating, and loss of the aircraft, and in some cases the loss of the aircrew as well. So there's a push for many years to equip the Tomcat with the -10 big motor, the big engine we called it, and the Navy finally did and built the F-14D with the capability, the air-to-ground capability that I talked about. And that F-14D was what became, in my mind, the super fighter. I mean, it was a fantastic airplane air-to-air and fantastic airplane air-to-ground. Just a wonderful machine that we should have had all along. However, that was at the end of its life. And then at that point, it had been around probably for around 30 years. And it was going out of service. The airplane itself became hard to maintain, hard to keep flying, and too many maintenance man hours expended for 1 hour flight time. It just became inefficient to the extent that you just couldn't support it any longer. And then sadly, it went out of service in 2006.
Yeah. Did you ever fly the B and D models of the Tomcat?
I flew the D model, and it was a hot number, I'll tell you that. I mean, it was, you knew you had something, you had a beast in your hands when you stroked those burners on takeoff, and you got airborne. And it was the airplane that we'd always wanted with the weight ratio. It was a hot airplane.
Yeah, like I've seen a slick, like without the missile rack or the missile like underneath, with like the flaps on like a takeoff, and it just goes like straight up with the gear all the way up. That's
absolutely, yeah. You could do all kinds of wild things in it, and we did not have the other thing that was kind of a detractor was that we did not have a fly-by-wire flight control system, which equipped the F-18 and all later fighters. All of them have a fly-by-wire. I think it might have been the last airplane built fighter at any rate with what I would call a conventional or old style flight control system with pulleys and cranks and levers and so forth. I mean, it worked okay, but you could have done a lot more magic things with the F-14, as you see being done in air shows, with the F-22 and the F-18 and the other airplanes that are configured with fly-by-wire.
yeah, because I think last year at the Rear International Air Tattoo Air Show, there was the F-15 QA with like all computer or like fly-by-wire, and the way that it was like moving like a Raptor, and you could see the elevators and all the flight controls like twiddling like that.
You've been to Riyadh, have you?
Yeah.
That Riyadh is the best air show on the planet.
Yeah, there's so
I've been to a couple of those, and they're just fantastic. I love the air shows. I also love the air shows at Duxford, Battle of Britain Air Show. Favorite. We were there last year for the Battle of Britain Air Show.
Yeah. Have you flown a World War II aircraft?
No, no, I haven't. That's sadly, I thirsted. I've made many trips many visits to Duxford to see all those beautiful machines, all the artifacts there. And I was there one day when they were giving, I think they were corporate rides in the 2-seat Spit, and my tongue was hanging out, thinking, "Geez, it'd be so cool to get a ride in that thing," but it didn't happen. They were also giving rides in the Tiger Moth. So I got a ride in the front seat of the Tiger Moth, and as you walk out to the airplane, they put the sheep line leather jacket on you, and then the same thing with the helmet and the goggles, all that. Got in the front seat of the Tiger Moth. Got airborne for 45 minutes in the Tiger Moth, which is kind of cool. I didn't tell the pilot in the back seat anything about my background, but it did give me a chance to fly it. And then, so I just flew for about airborne 45 minutes, and I got to fly it for about 40 minutes. We landed and stopped. I got out of the airplane, and he got out. I said, "Oh, you've flown before, have you?" I said, "A little bit." I flew a little bit.
Yeah. You should get a present and then fly in the Spit in the back seat.
Yeah.
No. You should do that.
Oh, I'd love to do it. I would love to have done that. That would have been fantastic.
Yeah.
They do. I think they do offer rides. I think at Duxford, I've seen it advertised that they advertise rides, but it's pretty expensive.
Yeah. It's like 2-3 grand for half an hour.
Yeah, something like that. A lot of money.
Yeah. So back to the F-14. So I read that you had involvement with the setup for the Atlantic side of the fleet squadrons. So yeah, could you tell more about that? Or is that correct?
Yeah, I'm not sure what you're getting at, but I can talk a little bit about my involvement with the F-14 in the Atlantic Fleet. Multiple deployments on different carriers with the Tomcat. I think the most significant one was when I was my first tour as an Air Wing commander on board the USS Nimitz, and we were in the Mediterranean Sea. And this is when Colonel Gaddafi declared a line of death across the Gulf of Sidra. Said anybody flying inside that line of death, we will take under attack from my Air Force. So we decided, the Navy decided, and the combined forces there in the Mid decided to challenge that, of course, because we talked about this, because that's the line of death is the restrictions of freedom of navigation, which all nations observe. So we wanted to challenge it, which we did. We put a couple of carriers down there near the Gulf, most of the Sixth Fleet ships as well. And on Nimitz, we launched Tomcats to cap stations close to the beach, close to the shore. But they had several different air bases, Tripoli and Benghazi and Aqaba Ibn Nafa. They had a variety of different, in the Libyan Air Force, they had a variety of different kinds of air fighters. They had Mirage F-1s, they had MiG-25s, they had MiG-23s, up a different place, different bases across the shoreline there, right off the just a couple miles of the beach. Anyway, so we set up our combat air patrol stations to challenge that. Maybe our stations were probably outside of 50 miles, maybe 50 to 100 miles out. And then one of the sections, that's two airplanes, two Tomcats from Fighter Squadron 41 were challenged by a couple of MiG 22s. I think they were Su-22s. They're Russian fighter, and they came under attack by one of the lead airplane in that section that came out to challenge them. So that's clear demonstration of hostile intent, and so the two F-14 responded to that, did a couple of turns, got behind the two SUs, and fired sidewinders at the SUs and shot both of them down. Both of those Libyan pilots survived, by the way. They had from intel later on that they were rescued by Libyan surface ships, surface boats, and picked up and recovered. So that happened on the first day of our operations called FONOS, Freedom of Navigation, FON operations there in the Gulf of Sidra. So we had a second day also, and on that second day, I got airborne as the Air Wing commander and took my cap station, took a vector down to a couple of airplanes that were coming out from the beach, intercepted those two Libyan fighters, and they were Mirage F-1s. And I joined up on the leader, and the guy who was my wingman for that mission was also the commanding officer of that squadron. I was Fighter Squadron 84. The Jolly Rogers was Fighter Squadron 84. And so we joined up. I was flying close aboard my Mirage F1, and they didn't do anything out of the ordinary. Just made some nice, gentle, easy turns. They were not trying to. We wanted to make sure that we knew that they were not going to try to shoot at us. And I was configured with some Sparrows and Sidewinders and some couple of Phoenix too. So I made sure that the guy I was flying on saw the weapons that I was carrying, and I'm sure he did. And we stayed with them for a while, and then they headed back home, and we detached and came back to the Nimitz to land on the Nimitz. So that was a pretty significant couple of days with Splash 2 Libyan fighters. So it was Navy 2, Libya 0. It's like a soccer game.
Yeah. That was your first tour as a carrier Air Wing commander. So yeah, how many other tours as a carrier Air Wing commander did you do?
One other tour as an Air Wing commander. That followed about, let's say, 5 or 6 years after the first tour, and I had been selected for a new program. The Navy decided that they needed to upgrade the status of our Air Wing commanders. My first tour, I was a commander, like a lieutenant colonel in the other forces, but like a commander, that was my rank, and I was really a part of the ship's company, the carrier's company, and my reporting senior was the commander of the carrier. We operated in that fashion for many years in the Navy. That was that kind of an organization, and until we had some significant tactical failures of operations in the Mediterranean, one of which was really bad. We had a ship and an aircraft carrier and Air Wing launch a major strike into Lebanon, into targets in the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon, and they launched it at dawn. The sun's coming up, hazy weather at that time of year in the Mediterranean. Couldn't see the target. These are mixed strike group of A7s and A6s, and they really didn't find the target. But we had 2 airplanes shot down. One of it was an A7, with the Air Wing commander of that particular ship and Air Wing. He was flying that airplane. He was shot down, had to eject. He landed in the water, was picked up by a couple of fishermen, taken back to the beach, and then held inside a soccer stadium there in Beirut until we could get our American forces in there to get him out, which they did. The other airplane that was shot down was an A6. The pilot was killed in that shoot down, but the bombardier navigator and the airplane ejected safely and was picked up by Syrian army, and he was captured. A lot of diplomatic effort, huge diplomatic effort was undertaken to get him released, which they finally did. That strike, that great failure, and a couple of other things that happened, stimulated the senior Navy leadership thinking we need to have a better equipped Air Wing commander and Air Wing for the future. So they determined that they would start something called an Air Wing commander's nickname is a CAG, CAG, Commander Air Group. So we call them CAG. They needed a different kind of CAG, and better trained and so forth, and ready to handle the new developments in terms of weapons that the potential adversaries had. So they stood up a new organization, Super CAG, who is now an 06, a captain, like a colonel, same rank as a colonel, and better trained and better inculcated into intelligence information, and just better prepared to operate and run the air wing in today's environment with advanced missiles and aircraft and so forth. So I was the first one of those. I was hand selected by the Secretary of the Navy. I was on track to go to command a ship, but I was derailed from that, and then became the first Super CAG, if you will. And the other fellow, the two of us who were selected. I went to the east coast of the United States, the fleet there, and the other guy went to the Pacific Fleet. That program started back in the mid 80s, and is now institutionalized in the Navy, where we have that kind of an organization set up. So that was my second tour as an air wing commander. But the second tour was as a captain, and I reported directly to the embarked admiral on the ship, not to the ship's captain.
Yeah. So eventually you became an admiral, right?
And in that tour, as a Super CAG, I was selected for flag. And when I finished that tour as Air Wing Commander, I was assigned to the Pentagon. So I went to the Pentagon for duty.
Yeah. So, yeah, what was it like, that transition from being the Super CAG to working with the Pentagon? Is there like what are the differences? And
well, I mean, as a Super CAG, you're a privileged person because you have command of this group of 2,500 men and women, all kinds of different airplanes, and you're worried about the day-to-day employment of the air wing as a striking arm of the United States Navy and the fleets around the globe. So, very powerful piece of equipment that the U.S. Navy has, and is recognized by all nations. Whenever some sort of dust-up occurs anywhere on the globe, the first thing that the combined forces commanders ask are, where are the carriers? So they want to get carriers involved as soon as they can because of the powerful strategic striking punch that the carrier does have. So that's a very heady sort of place to be, because you're responsible for your responsibility so broad and so right at the heart of everything we trained over the years to be and to act as naval aviators, as pilots. And you contrast that with the necessary business that occurs in the Pentagon, and that is not at all in any way, shape, or form like being at sea with your air wing on board an aircraft carrier. It's administrative, very important stuff that's done there, but it's not. You're not with the fleet. You're with a group of dedicated professionals, military and civilian, who are doing the best things for the nation and the Department of Defense. But that's not where your heart is. Your heart is at sea with your fellow aviators.
Yeah, would you have preferred to not be an admiral? And so yeah, you preferred that, being closer to the Navy rather than in the Pentagon environment?
Well, I had that happen as a follow-on tour for me, at any rate. That is, after I made flag and Pentagon tour, I was selected to become a carrier group commander. So I got to go back to the fleet as commanding a carrier group, which is the aircraft carrier and other ships that surround it, ships and submarines and other airplanes around it. That was a wonderful opportunity for me to I continued to fly. So I was an admiral, and I flew on and off the ship on multiple occasions. Not at night, because I didn't fly at night, but day ops around the ship was, that's a lot of fun. But flying at night, that isn't all that much fun.
Yeah. And what time period is this when you return back?
as an air wing commander, it was in the early '90s. I was flying the Tomcat on and off the ship.
Yeah.
And, kind of funny. So when the word went out that the admiral was flying, people would come up topside up on the island, and they knew I was coming back to land. They were waiting for the show to happen. I think they all expected me to do something extraordinarily bad. I think, but I was very commonly dull. Nothing happened.
So was that near like the Desert Storm period, or were you not in that?
I was assigned to. I was in another job ashore and watching from afar what was happening, and wishing that I had the opportunity to be involved in the Desert Storm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So yeah, what was your favorite period of your like career as a naval aviator?
As the Super CAG, absolutely.
Yeah.
Operationally oriented, still flying airplanes, and working with fantastic people, and a good mission, good understanding of operations, and that was the best tour I ever had.
Yeah. What were some of your favorite aircraft to fly or that you've flown?
All the airplanes I've flown, and I've flown a bunch of different airplanes. The airplanes I flew, there are two that are in my heart, and that is the F-4 Phantom and the Tomcat. Hard to separate the two in terms of which one was my favorite, but in terms of capability, the F-14 hands down was the best. But in terms of really pilot, melding of the pilot and then the man-machine interface kind of thing, I love the Phantom. The Phantom, especially around the ship. The Phantom around the ship is, on the ball, on the glide slope, and you're getting ready to land. It was a manly airplane. It was a turbojet and not a turbofan. So when you added power, you got an instantaneous power response. And in the F-14, it was a turbofan, so you had a little bit of a delay when you push the throttles up. The Phantom was a manly airplane. You could fly a great pass at the ship in the F-4.
Yeah. So did you fly the Hornet as well?
I did. I flew the Hornet. Didn't fly it much. I got maybe 25 or 30 hours in it back in. I just more of a familiarization for me as a senior officer.
Yeah.
To fly the F-18 to find out what it was like.
Yeah. How did you find it compared to the F-4 and the F-14?
Well, it had really great handling qualities. Flying qualities were great, but it was it was a supersonic airplane, but it was barely supersonic. And whereas the Tomcat and the Phantom were Mach 2 airplanes.
Yeah.
I thought that the Hornet was a great airplane for its purpose as a strike fighter. You could fulfill both roles. The fighter role was kind of not quite as good as in the Tomcat, for example, but it could carry lots of different weapons. Had a very versatile airplane that the other two were not.
Yeah. And do you have any aircraft that you would wish that you wanted to fly, like any point in history?
Well, I'll tell you, one of my most favorite flights of all time was down in Key West, Florida, in the early '90s. When in Key West we have a dogfighting, a fighter against fighter training squadron down there, and so I did what we call I call the hat trick. I flew the F-4, the F-14, and the F-5 all in one day. So that was fighter pilot heaven right there, I tell you.
Yeah.
So and all three of those fights were air-to-air dogfighting fights. So dogfighting in all three of them. I guess you could call those three my favorite airplanes of all time.
Yeah. Do you have any favorite dissimilar or like any dogfighting, like any particular moments that you're like most proud of?
I think to answer that, I just hang my hat on that last statement about that particular mission that I flew. And well, probably in the F-4, another proud moment, if you will, in my flying career was in the F-4 at sea in the Gulf of Tonkin during the Vietnam War. I was we every landing in the aboard ship is graded by the landing signal officer, and I was flying in such a way and so much that I got very very good at landing on the ship. I had and each pass is given a grade. If you fly a good pass, it's called an OK, and then below that's a fair, and then it become more definitive as the worse it gets. Anyway, they're all graded, and then the purpose is to inspire the pilots to fly good passes, so and safe passes. But I had something I thought was kind of extraordinary occur. I flew 54 straight OK passes uh, at the ship.
Wow.
Not an easy thing to do.
Yeah.
And so that was in the Phantom. As I said, the Phantom was really good on around the ship, in the landing pattern.
Yeah.
Anyway, I was very proud of that.
So the Hornet, I've tried it on the simulator, and it's quite easy to, or not easy, but like with the get it all trimmed out, and it like responds really nicely in that landing configuration. Is that like the Phantom, or how it would feel when you're all trimmed out and you're just like walking the throttles?
Oh, you mean you're talking about the F-18?
Yeah, and like, or how the F-4 would be in that.
Oh, well, the F-4 was a lot faster on final. It was probably 15 to 20 knots faster than the F-18 or the Tomcat on final. So you could, the airplane was speed stable, so if you got on speed and you're at the right angle of attack, the airplane would hold that angle of attack without too much effort on the part of the pilot. Now you had to make some adjustments, but not as many adjustments as you had to do in the Tomcat. And I'm not sure about the F-18 because I didn't fly it very much. But that speed stability and your instantaneous power response gave you an airplane that you could really groove it. You could really fly good passes on it. Safe, but not only safe, but really good passes.
Yeah. Did you ever do a shithole break with like the F-4 or F-14 going into the carrier?
Yeah, absolutely. Doesn't every fighter pilot do that?
Yeah.
You try to do some Sierra Hotel break, when it's easy to do if you're a single ship, you're coming back after a test flight or something, and you can do it yourself. And it's hard. You gotta be good, because it's easy to screw it up, and you don't want to screw it up because the whole ship is watching. And if you screw it up, your name is Bud. But if you make a good pass, you break at the mast or at the bow of the ship going 500 knots, and you break and bring it around. You're in a hard turn all the time, trying to slow down it soon enough to get your landing gear and flaps down. You got your hook down already, but you're working like crazy to hit all the checkpoints in the pattern. And you don't want to get long in the groove. That is, you don't want to be too deep in the pattern. If you're really cool, you can make that happen. You can roll wings level on final, and you have just a couple of seconds to make a correction or two. But then you're gonna land.
Yeah.
Trap a bolter. You don't want a bolter.
Did you see anyone mess it up?
Oh yeah, you'd see guys. Sadly, some unfortunately, well, I won't talk about that incident. But yeah, I've seen the guys screw up. And when I was a CAG, I insisted that my air crews, when they come back to the ship, that they look shit hot. I said it's a measure of your discipline and the measure of the professionalism of your squadron about how you look from the observers on the ground or on the ship. And if you're in a low holding pattern, I don't want to see sloppy formation. I want to see people tucked up tight. And if they're in my view and you're looking bad, you're going to hear about it. So anyway, it's just a measure of discipline and professionalism, I think.
Yeah. And how did you get your call sign?
Bad Fred?
Yeah.
How do you, we don't have enough time to talk about that one.
Oh, okay.
It'll take another whole program.
So yeah, that's all the questions that I've got. So yeah.
Okay, good. Enjoy the opportunity.
Yeah.
Take care. God bless you.
You too. Thank you.
Take care. I'll put Lance back on.
Thanks, Luca. Appreciate it, man.
Thank you.
See you, brother.
Yeah, see ya.